right, well, let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Digital Forum. We're running a little behind today, so if anybody wants to join the panel, please raise your Zoom hand and Marty will bring you in. We've got a busy morning for you. We have Russell Graves going to be talking about shooting images that win photo contests, which we just got done with the WACO photo competition. We had a lot of great results. Congratulations to Pat Lynch, who took Best of Show this time. We've got a number of things coming up. June, we're just going to do Q&A for the whole month, for the whole 2 hours. We'll be talking about pretty much all the new stuff that's coming to Lightroom and Photoshop. There's been quite a few new updates to Lightroom that we'll talk about there. In July, we have Joe and Marie Riccozzi talking about postcard photography. They do a bunch of stuff in the CACA group with doing postcard images, and he's going to talk about that. And I'm working on a third guy that may be in August, but right now it's still in the planning stages. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into Q&A if we've got time, because I've got 3 choices from him of what he might be able to talk about. And everybody, I've talked to Ken and Marty about it, and we all come up with 2 that are both good talks. So maybe you guys can break the difference. So let's get started. Excuse me. Russell is a Texas native, grew up in rural Texas with strong work ethic instilled by his blue-collar family, who encouraged his imagination and creativity. A pivotal moment in high school sparked his passion for wildlife photography, leading to early successes in publishing and teaching. Despite achieving accolades as a agri-science teacher, he transitioned to pursue photography full-time, capturing the essence of rural life. Russell's expertise and passion led him to lead workshops worldwide, earning him recognition as a top Texas photographer. Balancing his professional achievements, he remains grounded in his family and friends' role. Now resides near his childhood farm. Russell continues his love for the land while cherishing the pride his parents hold for him. Hard reading today. So the topic today is shooting images that win contests. Is a process, and we'll learn about perspective from the judge and learn the things that it takes for your images to rise above the competition. So I'd like to welcome Russell Graves, and let me change the spotlight. Welcome, Russell. Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. I need to warn everybody that as I go through my presentation today, I speak 3 languages. American English is probably the worst language I speak, and then Southern English is the second best language I speak, and then Texan is the one I speak the most fluently. So if I say something that doesn't make sense today, or you don't understand what I'm telling you, just feel free to, I don't know y'all's format, if people can ask questions or raise their hand or how they do it, but feel free.
Yeah.
And also I said, oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll break in if we get questions from the people.
Okay.
They usually will put it in a Q&A for me, so I'll just break in and at a good point and ask the question. So
okay. And yeah, and so to that end, I mean, I always like to make these things a dialogue and not a monologue. So if anyone has any questions as I go through, whether about the things I'm talking about or even just how I made some pictures that you're going to see in the presentation, feel free to jump in there and ask away. I always enjoy doing this. So with that said, let me should be able to see the screen now. Shooting wildlife photos that win contests. Really should be shooting nature photos that win contests, but we'll go with this. Like mentioned before, my name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm, north of Dodge City, Texas. And it's I'd like to say it's a beautiful day outside. It's warm. But it's cloudy. Feels like it's been cloudy for the past 6 months here. We've gotten so much rain this year. It's just hard to get any work done. So I'm waiting for it to dry out. So this is perfect for me to do this on a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. And I just appreciate everyone you guys letting me come share what I know with y'all. And because here's the one thing you got to remember. There's a pretty good crowd in here today, but you're looking at the only member of the Dodge City, Texas Photo Club. There's nobody else around that's an enthusiast like I am. And so when I get a chance to talk photography with other like-minded people, I always enjoy the opportunity to do that. So let's talk about this. And again, if you have any questions as I go along, just let me know. Tell you a little bit about me, which you heard a little bit about that in the introduction. I'm a commercial and editorial photographer. And really from a young age, that's what I set out to want to do. And commercial meaning I used to shoot a lot of in the past, I've shot a lot of ad campaigns for companies to help advertise their brands. Some of the companies you may know, I used to do a lot of work in the hunting industry, Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, companies like that. I don't do so much of that anymore, but I still do quite a bit of editorial photography, and that's where I get sent off on assignment from magazines to shoot pictures of whatever they've got for me to shoot pictures of. It mainly kind of deals in things like this, the nature, wildlife, outdoors, and rural lifestyles. I grew up out in the country in Texas. That's been my main hustle in life, is trying to figure out a way where I could raise my family, have a good standard of living, and then always live in rural areas. And so far, so good. I've accomplished that for a while. My wife and I just celebrated, we're going on 31 years of being married. We just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary last September. So we're about to hit 31 here in a few more months. We have a couple of children we're almost empty nesters. We've got a 23-year-old daughter who's finishing up college and a 19-year-old son who's just starting college. So we're plenty busy. I'm a writer and an author, aside from doing photography. It's really the writing and it's really my ability to write that got me into photography as deep as I was, but I've always had a natural ability to tell stories and write things. And so I still do a lot of that. I've written 6 or 7 books and working on a couple more right now, and still write for a lot of magazines. Also an educator, and I'm an educator in 2 ways. One, I was a public school educator for 16 years. So from 1993 to 2009, I was a high school agri-science teacher. I taught agricultural science at a rural high school in the Texas Panhandle. Loved that job, loved doing it. I just ran out of gas and was ready to do something else. And then in the meantime, I was growing all the photography stuff, doing the speaking, because, essentially teaching is speaking. So I found a niche in that. I really had a good speaking career going on until COVID came around. And then also I'm a hobby farmer. Hackberry Farm is a farm that's been in my family since the early 1960s, and we're the latest ones to own it. And so we don't do big commercial farming here, but we still kind of niche farming. We grow hay, but mainly we just like looking at the birds and looking at the wildlife around. And so one of the key things about taking pictures that shoot contests is, one thing you got to know about me is I've never entered a contest in the past. I'm not going to say in my life, because I used to enter the county fair when I first got started, but I haven't really entered a contest since then. And that's my disclaimer. And, but what I have done is I've judged a lot of contests, because for me, when you're trying to make a living as a photographer, your contest, you're really in a contest every single day. And that contest is, how do you get hired by the people that are going to pay you so you can support your family? So that's been my contest. But through me doing my work with magazines and through my commercial work and now leading workshops, I get asked to judge a lot. So that's kind of where I come across as a little bit of an expert. And I'll also say this. I've also been a pretty good coach too, because this young man right here, this is my son. This is when he was about 17. He's 19 now. His hair is a little longer than what it was in this picture, but he's a pretty good photographer in his own right. And so using these techniques, I'm going to tell you today, that young man has never lost a photo contest. He might not have placed first or best in show in every one, but I would say he's probably about 85% first place in all the contests he's entered. And then the rest of them, he's placed in just about every picture he puts in there. And so, and it's all using these techniques I'm going to talk to you about. And, no one's ever naturally talented in photography. It's a learned art. You know, may have a natural eye for composition, but everyone has to learn shutter speed and aperture and ISO and all that stuff that you got to learn, all the technicalities of it. And it can be confusing. And so once you can get past that, then you can start concentrating on the artistic part. And that's the approach I've taken with him always. You know, he's had the ability to tag along with me since he was just a little guy. And so and he's also had access to pretty good equipment too, so that helps as well. But it's not all about equipment. It's really, there's a process to it. There's a process to judging, to taking pictures that win contests. And one of the things that I'll just tell you from a judge's mentality, what I always try to do, you know, because there's been contests in the past. I can think of one I judged about 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago this summer, that it had 5,000 entries that I had to look at. And so one of the first things that I start doing is trying to figure out who gets disqualified first, because there may be good pictures, but at some point, you got to start making cuts. And so one of the first things that I encourage people to do is review the rules. And you know, if I had one guy that I had one guy that asked me a question after I judged the contest one time, you know, why didn't my picture make it? And it was pretty simple. They asked for pictures that were like, I can't remember the number, let's say 2,500 pixels wide at the widest. He was submitting pictures that were 1,000 pixels wide. And so he didn't follow the rules. And so since you don't follow the rules, that's just an easy place to cut. And that concept sounds so simple, but you'd be surprised at how many people either, I'm not going to say anyone purposely disregards the rules, but they may miss the rules. So I encourage people to review the rules at all times when you're entering photo contest. By the way, Jeff, how long do I have to talk about this? Is there a
Well, about an hour.
Okay.
If you need longer, we can go. We actually go till noon.
Okay.
So,
no. Well, no,
yeah.
about an hour is how long this is. I was just trying to figure out if I needed to speed up or not.
No, no.
Jeff, remember, I mean, I'm the only member of my photo club. So if you need me to talk 6 hours, I can marathon this baby if I need to.
Well, and you're free when you're done with your talk to stick around and listen to us answer different photo questions that we get from everybody on general problems. So
I certainly will, and I'm always glad to help too. So yeah,
that's what this group. That's what this group is basically a group of photographers that just like to talk photography and help everybody out. So
it's my favorite kind.
Yep.
So yeah, review the rules. It sounds so simple, but you know, when you're shooting for contest, you need to make sure that all those bases are covered from a rule standpoint. So you're not pegged as an easy target on the first cut to disqualify your pictures if you didn't follow the rules. Now, I'll admit some rules on these contests are a little vague, you know, especially when you're talking about thematic or thematic sort of contest where they're saying, you know, shoot a picture of beauty. You know, beauty can mean a lot of different things. And so, but as far as what I mean by review the rules are the hard and fast rules, the technical specs, the you know, the entry deadlines, all that stuff. Just make sure you got it, and make sure you got it, the pictures, because some contests, like this contest I was referring to, that has so many entries, they've got specific metadata requirements that have to go in the metadata. And so, you know, when you start kind of reviewing the pictures, that's to me, that's the first things I check for is, did they follow all the rules? If it's yes, and then go into the next round. If it's no, that's just an easy place to cut. So my point is, don't make your images easy for the judge to disqualify just on a rule technicality. Number two, shoot for the contest. And what I mean by that is every contest, I don't think, are universal in what they're trying to portray through the contest. You know, this particular contest I was referring to earlier is a contest about South Texas wildlife. And so even though they've got some specific rules that make you shoot for that, every contest is different. You know, like my son, when we enter stuff, the stuff he's entered has been like 4-H, state 4-H photography contest or the county fair. Well, when we go out to shoot pictures, I kind of think about those contests and keep them in mind. You know, like the Fannin County Fair, for example, our little county fair we have here. What's going to win that contest? Well, it's probably, even though he's been to Africa with me, it's probably not going to be a picture of a gorilla in Africa unless it's just really, really, really stunning. Because my thought is the judges who are going to judge a contest like that can't really relate to something like that. You know, they may think, they may not appreciate the work he had to go through to shoot that picture. They may just think he took it in a zoo. And so when I say shoot for the contest, I even mean, you know, if it's a local Wisconsin contest, uh, try to shoot something that even though you may or may not know who the judges are, try to shoot something that you think will appeal to that particular region that contest is trying to cover. And so that's kind of a nebulous thought, but it's one that's really rings true, that for every, you know, every contest you do, there's a certain theme to that contest, or a certain there's a certain kind of brand to that contest. And one of the ways you shoot for the contest, if you can, is review the past winners. And if you start looking back, and you can't do this on every contest, but I would, if it's a contest that's important enough to you, I would certainly ask the question if you could see what the past winners are. Because one of the things you do, and this is a trick I learned when I was teaching school, when I was teaching high school, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the agriculture education and the whole FFA program, but aside from showing livestock that people are so familiar with on those like 4-H and FFA programs, uh, there's also a huge component of academic contests that you learn. They're all some kind of agriculture related, but nonetheless, there's a lot of academic contests. And so at my little school from Texas, we had a lot of success on both the state and national level in those various contests. And so one of the things I started doing, the thing I learned a long time ago, was if you start reviewing the past winners of a particular contest, first you figure out who your competition is, then you can research that a little more and to figure out what you need to do to beat them. And number two, if you look at past winners of photography contests, you may find out that it's usually pictures of kids that win best of show in a particular contest. Or it may be, if it's a nature photography contest, it may be some dynamic picture of a bird species that seems to kind of take it every single year. So as if you review the past winners, if you can, you probably start to recognize trends on what the winners are. Or it may be a technique, not just a subject matter. It may be a technique. This is one of the successes I've had as an editorial photographer. I've had hundreds of magazine covers in my life. And the reason why is I feel like that, I mean, I've never said I'm the greatest photographer in the world. I've never claimed to be that. But one of the things I did a long time ago was I cracked the code of what it took to get pictures on the cover of a magazine. And so what I mean by that is, number one, subject matters to some degree, but number one, magazine covers have to be shot in the vertical. And now this picture here is kind of cropped to fit on this slide, but this was shot in the vertical. Number two, it kind of drives my compositional styles, because if you think about a magazine, and if we can use this picture as a good example, if you shoot a certain way, you can put the title of the magazine above the coyote, and then on the left-hand side, it's got plenty of room to put what's in this month's issue. And so by following that same format, I've been real successful in doing that. Now, I say that, how does that apply to contests? If you review the past winners, you may start seeing a trend of, you know, vertical pictures of whatever with really blurred out backgrounds seem to win all the time. You start seeing trends over time. And again, I'm being real vague on that because every contest is different. But my point is, if you're serious about winning contests, you take the time and go review who the past winners are. You review the rules like we talked about. And then you go and review the past winners, and then you can start sort of building an idea in your mind about what it's going to take to win a particular contest. So I hope that makes sense. This look right here is something I fell in love with, and it's something that's pretty common in outdoor and nature and wildlife photography, but I still use the same sort of technique with people, and that I like shooting pictures with really blurry backgrounds. And there's a technique to that. You know, if you look back at all these pictures, let me go backwards some more. If you look back at all these pictures, you start seeing the same themes over and over and over again, the same way I shoot, because again, my contest has always been trying to get hired so I can put a roof over my family's head and feed them and send them to college one day. And so, that's the thing I noticed about the particular contest I'm in. The business of photography is what works and what doesn't. And so I encourage you to review the past winners when you can of these contests, and you'll start seeing trends, because that's one thing I noticed again back on, not only when I was teaching, but also back to the days I started trying to get pictures in magazines and do work at a professional level. I just noticed there were trends, stuff that worked, stuff that didn't. I tried to do everything that worked. And here's another thing too: learn about the judges if you can. Uh, I know a lot. I just had a contest email come across, or had a notification of a contest come across my email the other day, because they said the entries would be open on this particular day. Like, let's say the entries open yesterday on Friday. Well, about Wednesday, I got an email that said meet the judges, and it had who all the judges on this photo contest was. And I don't even remember the contest, I mean, because I'm not going to enter it anyway. But it's just, a lot of contests will tell you who's going to be judging it. Well, again, going back to how serious you are about trying to win and trying to learn photography and learn to shoot for contests, if you can learn about the judges, it's gonna help you out a lot. And again, this is a trick I learned uh, back when I was teaching school. When you would take kids to a livestock contest and they'd have a particular judge that was going to judge the livestock show, you just knew that he liked a certain kind of animal. And so if you brought an animal in the show ring with him and it didn't fit the criteria that he liked, you knew what your chances were overall. And so, but the thing about photography, when you've got time to run up to a contest, if you learn about the judges, if you found out I'm judging a contest and you took the time to go look at my website and learn all you can about me, you'd figure out pretty quick. By the way, has anyone ever seen a possum hanging by the tail? If that
I haven't. No.
if that doesn't make you smile on a Saturday morning, you might be dead inside. So I'm just throwing that out there. That's I, that is I took that shot. I took that picture actually a long time ago, probably 10 or 15 years ago. There was two baby possums in a tree, and is actually a rancher friend told me about them. They said they're just right behind my house, and so I went out there to their place, and sure enough, he had two possums in a tree. And then when one of them was trying to get away, the other one fell off the tree but hung on there by its tail, and so that's when I shot that picture. But if you go to my website and you take a look at the pictures that I choose to feature, the thing that I tell people in the world that this is what Russell Graves does, you'll notice a couple of things. Number one, I like a little bit of action, not over the top action, but I like the animals to be doing something. Not always, but in general, if you can take a picture of them doing something. And number two, I like these really out of focus backgrounds. So my point is, if I like that kind of stuff, wouldn't it stand to reason, and I think it does, that I would tend to pick pictures that look like the pictures that I like to take. And so, and I think if judges are honest, they're always going to say that you pick what you like. You go to the grocery store. I'm going as soon as this is, or not as soon as it's over, but sometime today we're having a big Memorial Day cookout tomorrow on the farm. So I got to go to the grocery store. I'm going to pick out the things that people like. I'm not going to try anything experimental just for the sake of being artistic. I'm going to try to shoot for the judges, which the judges in my case tomorrow are going to be all of my family that's coming over to eat. I want them to give me a pat on the back and say the meal was good. Same way when you take pictures. I mean, if you learn about the judges, and I don't think you pander to them, but the judges on these contests are judges for a reason, the most part, because they've demonstrated an expertise in their field, and the whoever organizes the contest think that they have the bona fides to be able to judge a contest and represent the organization like they want it to. So learn about the judges if you can. It's, to me, that's maybe one of the best tips I give you all day, is just if you can get in the heads of the judges and figure out how they think, it's always a bonus. I've never fancied myself a landscape photographer much. I do take landscape photographs, but I've never hung my shingle saying that I'm a premier landscape photographer. I like all nature photography. I consider myself a nature photographer. But this picture here, this is in the Great Smoky Mountains about a year ago, and I'd looked for this picture my whole life. I'd seen other people do it before, of the leaves swirling in a whirlpool. And this is the cool thing. I'm gonna get a little sappy here when I say this. cool thing about nature and what nature photography is, no matter how much I go back to the same place, I wake up, I live amongst nature. I wake up on my farm every morning and I look outside, and every day there's something, the light's different, the clouds are different, and there's some kind of critter that's different every single day roaming around that I can see in my pasture. And so this particular spot I'd been to, my goodness, probably a dozen times in my life. This is on a trail in the Great Smoky Mountains, beautiful national park. If you've never been there before, my favorite. I could go there every month if I could find a reason to. Just love going there. And anyway, I walk up on this little waterfall, and the waterfall is not tall, a couple of feet tall. Walk up on this little waterfall, and that year the water level happened to be at the level, perfect level, when it would spill over the rock like this, it would hit another rock, and it made that swirl in the leaves, and the leaves were swirling. And the people that were with me, I told them I've looked for this spot my whole life, and I finally found it. And it was just a remarkable scene. And that, to me, that's one of the cool things about nature photography, and why I love talking about this stuff so much, because every time I've been there since then, I've probably been back to the spot about half a dozen times since then. And it was never that way before, and it hadn't been that way since. And so who knows when we'll get that perfect mix of water and leaves again, like we got in this particular scene. And another thing that really you gotta nail is technical excellence. And I get it. If I could ever invent a time machine, the first thing I'm going to go do is not go back and meet any of my family, or go back and find out who the next Super Bowl winners are going to be so I can get rich. I'm going to find the guy that invented all the photography terms and have a word with them, because photography is made needlessly complicated when you got, when people tell you to stop down, or open up, or all these terms that they use, or this, when you say you need a faster shutter speed, and the fraction gets smaller, all these things for beginners are complicated, but they're necessary to learn, because if people don't follow the rules, they get, when I judge, they get, and it sounds terrible to say, and I don't really mean it that way, but you get disqualified early on. And then once you kind of, made the cut beyond, at first glance, that's a picture I like, and then I kind of move it to the next level. Then the next thing I start looking for is technical excellence. And technical excellence, it really means a lot of things. Is the image sharp? We live in the good old days of photography right now, from a standpoint of just, even the cheapest lenses that you buy for cameras are still pretty good lenses. And so there's not a good excuse for not having sharp pictures most all the time, particularly if you're going to enter them into a contest. Now, I will say this, I'll go off on a little bit of a caveat here, that I wish I'd have put it on here. When I was 17 years old at Dodge City High School in Dodge City, Texas, there was 15 kids in my graduating class, 11 boys and 4 girls. We were booking prom dates in 4th grade just to make sure we had one. That's how small a school I went to. But my junior year of school, we had, in Texas, I don't know if this is this way in Wisconsin, but in Texas, and it's still this way, your last 6 weeks of your junior and senior year, you have to write a research paper. And my junior year in school, I wrote a research paper called Wildlife Photography. And because that's how interested I was in this whole thing way back when. And I forgot I even had the paper in about a year or so ago. Right after we lived here, we built this house on the farm 2 years ago. So about a year ago, we found some boxes I was unpacking, just non-critical stuff, and I found that paper, and I'd forgotten I'd kept it all those years. And it was pretty remarkable to find it, because as I read through it, I start reading stuff that advice I still give myself today, and advice I give my workshop participants is, this may be the most controversial thing I say all day, so hold on a second. The most important piece of equipment that you can own that makes the most difference in your pictures, especially get sharp pictures, is a tripod. And the reason why, and people say, well, I don't like using, and I've heard it, I don't like using tripods, they're cumbersome to use, and they slow me down. And I get all that. But, or my camera, I had this conversation with a guy. It was joking, of course, but this guy's telling me, oh, I don't need a tripod because this lens has 8 stops of of stabilization, and my camera has 4 stops of stabilization. So that gives me 12 stops of stabilization. And I told him, I said, I've been watching you taking pictures, but you've got about 15 stops of shake. You can't outrun it. And so,
Yeah.
and so I just did a workshop last week and people are like, what shutter speed? Because we're shooting birds. What shutter speed are you on? I'm like, I'm shooting these at 1/60th of a second. And they couldn't believe it. But you can get sharp pictures at slow shutter speeds if you use good fundamental technique, which includes using the tripod. And again, I get it. They're cumbersome to use, but that's the lowest tech piece of equipment that any of us owns, but it's the one thing that'll make the most difference in your pictures, regardless of all this sharpening software. Because the sharpening software, I don't know if y'all use Topaz or not. I don't use it a lot, but I do have it because I find it's important for me to learn all these software programs. So when I'm out teaching a workshop, I can at least understand what people are talking about and give my 2 cents worth if they ask me a question. But software like Topaz, it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes it works really good, but a lot of times I don't know if y'all have had any experience with it. It just doesn't look any good. And so I
Yeah.
I'm I prefer, this is kind of an old school take on it, you know. Well, this is another conversation that come up last week in the workshop I was on, because we had people from all over the country, and in our kind of sit around talk, middle of the day, lunch is over, we're just all having conversations about different things about photography. One lady says, well, I was always told to shoot to the left on my histogram. And another lady says, well, I was told to shoot to the right on my histogram. And I make the statement that I think is obvious. Why not shoot where it's right on your histogram? And so, because we've gotten so caught up in all these little technological things we do. A lot of times we tend to forget about, there's good sound fundamental techniques that you can use in photography. One is understanding exposure and just trying to get it right. Because I've got all the tools. I'm looking at my computer here. I've got Lightroom and Photoshop and Topaz and all the tools that you can use uh, when you're taking pictures. But at the end of the day, when you go out and take pictures, because none of us gets a digital camera and takes fewer pictures in our life. We all take more and more pictures the more you get into it. And so one of the things that I try to do is make the whole process as efficient as I can get it. And one of the ways I do that is I'd rather be out taking pictures than I would sitting in front of my computer working on pictures for hours on end. So I tend to just try to get it right in the camera, and I try to get the exposure right. Part of that comes back to when I started shooting pictures, I was shooting film. Jeff, it cost me $12 a roll for slide film and processing and oh yeah,
Yeah.
by the way, you got 36 pictures out of the deal. 36
Yeah.
pictures, good and bad. Mostly bad back then. So it costs money. So I learned a long time ago, as a poor teacher and as a poor college student, if I wanted to take pictures, I got to do better and get it right. There was no option of fixing it in post back then. And so even though you can now, I still think there's an argument to be made about just trying to get it right in the camera. And so that all goes back to technical excellence, which, yeah, you can run your pictures through a sharpening algorithm, but I just think that it's best just to use good technique, use a tripod, use some kind of hand holding, and just get it right. And so that all starts with sharpness. I went off on a tangent on that because I'm sorry
Well,
about
it's
that.
important. You're
It,
right.
it, it, really, it really is. Because here's the thing: when you hand hold a camera, like most people do, like especially big telephotos, the way most people hand hold, even though their hand holding technique may be the proper way, where you've got your hand under the lens and you're holding it tight to your face and your elbows are in, that's still the most unstable way to hold a camera. And so on the hierarchy of stability, that's the least stable. Well, I guess you could go one step further than that. You could hold it out away from your body. That's least stable
Yeah.
than holding it into your body. But that's amongst the most unstable way of holding it. And so, yeah, you can take a knee, you get more stable. You can sit on your rear, you get more stable. You can lay on the ground. That's the most stable of hand holding. Or you could just use a tripod and just be steady every time you take a picture. Because here's the thing that none of us want to talk about, but it's true, that the longer in the day you go taking pictures and you're trying to hand hold a lens, the more inherently unsteady you become over the day because of fatigue.
Yeah.
People readily admit that, but the next thing people won't readily admit is there's about 300 joints between your toes and your hands that are all conspiring against you to hold a camera steady. a camera with a big telephoto lens steady. And the older we get, and this is the hard part, people have hard. This is the part that people have a hard time coming to grips with. The older we get, the more those joints conspire to work against us to hold a camera steady. So if you're serious about contest, it's pretty simple. Get serious about using a tripod, because that's the first thing I look at whenever I'm judging is if a picture comes across, if it's made all the cuts so far, if it comes across and it's not sharp, it's just give me an easy excuse to cut that one out from the next round of judging. Make sense?
Yep. Yep.
Also think about
Certainly
exceptional
does.
lighting. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something?
No,
Oh,
I agree. It's you know, having a sharp picture is the most important part of it.
God,
And
and really, if you think about it from just an aesthetic standpoint, it's pretty awesome to look at a really sharp picture that you just took. And to me, it sounds nerdy to say, but I marvel in the beauty of someone that created that lens and that camera, and then me looking through it and using that tool to create something that's just as sharp as it. Like this picture here, this picture has probably been on the cover of a dozen different magazines because it's such a sharp picture, and it checks the next
yeah,
box: exceptional lighting. Now, I get it. Nature photography would be awesome if it started about 10 a.m. in the morning and it quit about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. But the truth is that's the worst lighting of the day. I tend to ascribe to the Kenny Rogers rule of photography. Sometimes you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And if the sun's out in the middle of the day, there's just not a good way you can take a good picture to have exceptional lighting, especially if it's of a wild animal. Now you could do some if you're doing some macro stuff, yeah, you can bring in flash and manipulate it and get exceptional lighting that way. But for the most part, the best time to go take pictures if the sun's out is either the first couple hours of the morning or the last couple hours of the evening. And so that's when you get the exceptional light. You can, if you've got an overcast day like we have, you can still do a pretty good job, but you've got to kind of work at it a little more. And so exceptional lighting is another thing that catches my eye. If it's sharp and it's well lit, I'm kind of like, okay, I'm hanging on to this picture for a while because it looks pretty good. Because the thing about exceptional light, if I can break down this picture of this Bob White quail, number one, it's evenly illuminated. You can see a lot of detail in the feathers. Number two, that eye is as sharp as it can be. And then three, it's got a little bit of action to it. He's calling. And then the next thing is you can see that catch light in his eyes. So to me, it kind of checks off all the boxes. Plus, there's my classic technique I like to use of just a really blurry background. And so it starts checking off all the boxes. And then lack of motion blur, unless it's on purpose or category appropriate. And so again, that goes back to sharp images. I've got a picture hanging on my wall right here that you can't see, and it may be in this presentation, that had motion blur on purpose, but I'll show you a good example of what I think motion blur is. Usually if there's motion blur and it doesn't appear to be on purpose, it goes back to lack of sharpness and lack of good technique to make that picture. So, and then also watch the edges. That's a big thing for me too. And it makes it easier now. And it depends on the contest. We've got these tools like generative fill. And what I mean by watch the edges is I like a good clean frame where no limbs or anything are sticking around the edges. Sometimes that's you can accomplish that with a little bit of pre-planning, but sometimes excuse me, sometimes it's impossible. And so I really try to position myself whenever I see something. Sometimes it's just a matter of moving 2 feet to the left, 2 feet to the right to get a better background and to get a cleaner scene. But I just try to watch the edges and make the picture as clean as I can get it. And that's a stylistic choice, but that's what I like. Yeah, here we go. This is a motion blur on purpose. This is a coyote that I had coming in, and he was trotting. And when he was trotting through the scene, I thought to myself, I'm going to try to do a motion blur of this. And if you look at this, it was on purpose because everything is blurry except the most important part of this coyote. You know what that is?
yeah, the head and the eyes.
His eyeballs. Yeah. I mean, they're as
Yeah.
sharp as they can be. Everything else is blurry. So this would be a good example of a motion blur that was done on purpose. If his eyes were blurry, that would speak to either Russell messed up or Russell didn't use good technique to take this picture. And I can tell you that, and going back to the tripod was indispensable in getting this picture because the thing a tripod does is, and forgive me because I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm about to weigh in on some mathematics real quick. So if anyone in the audience is a mathematician, I ask for your forgiveness ahead of time. But when you're taking pictures in for this, for like this, for example, if I was trying to handhold in the 3D space, you're fighting against the X axis, the Y axis, and then the Z axis, the in and out, because you're always, even though the movements may be minute, you're having to fight against those three. Well, by just simply the act of using a tripod when I shot this picture, I was able to control the Z axis where, the camera's solid. It's not moving closer to the subject or further away from the subject because I'm moving. That's not moving. And then the Y axis or the X axis is controlled on a steady plane because I'm just panning the camera. So really the only thing I can mess up is the Y axis. And as long as I can hold it relatively steady, I'm going to get a sharp picture. And I've tried it before. I've tried to do motion blurs, handheld. I just can't do them good because of the realities of the physical limitations and the realities of the mathematical limitations of geometry. Because again, any slight movement you're not tracking it right, or you're not or you move in or out, or any kind of variation in the three axis of photography that you're in the 3D space that you're fighting against, it just won't work out right. And so that's what made that picture work as well too. The next advice I'd give you is enter lots of categories. That's the thing we do with our son. We pick out all the when the contest comes out, we would sit down. We haven't done one in a while because now he's starting to have to compete against the adults since he turned 18. But we'll do some for the county fair this year. But we look at all the categories that are possible, and we start thinking things like, how many pictures can you reasonably enter and get good pictures for all of them? Because the thought here is it's like going and playing the lottery, to some degree. You can enter one set of numbers, and you've got your chances of winning are not as good as if you enter a lot of different numbers. So that's what we're thinking about here is just enter lots of categories, because the one thing that enter lots of categories does, it improves your odds for placing in a contest or being recognized to some degree, however the contest recognize the entrance. But it does a thing that you may not have thought about before. Number one, it makes you think in different genres other than where you're comfortable, and it may get you to step outside of your comfort zone. One of the things I've been doing, and not entering contests, but trying to get better at, is when I'm walking around the farm here, I see we've got a million different insects on the place. So I've started trying to learn macro photography, and so me just wanting to try to be better at that, it's forced me to learn a new kind of photography. And that's the same way about entering lots of categories. Even if you enter stuff you're not really comfortable doing, if you force yourself to do it, just the practice of going out and taking pictures is going to help you improve in the category that you think you're best at. And so, photography, really, every year new technology is introduced, and new software is introduced, and all these little things are introduced to try to make better pictures in the end. But the one thing none of them can really replace, if we're talking about pure photography, I guess AI can replace it now, but that's a whole other conversation. But the one thing that all these tools can't replace is the one thing, and it's so simple to say, and this is what I tell my workshop participants all the time: nothing can replace practice. It's just one of those things you just got to go out and do, and just do it over and over and over again. But I will say this, if a lot of people tend to get frustrated in their mistakes in photography, and I don't think mistakes are any reason to get down on yourself, because even taking a bad picture, there's lessons in learning stuff there, because you're learning what not to do next time. And I tell people all the time, if we were to be as hard on our children when they were learning to walk as hard as we are on ourselves when we're learning photography, they would have never learned how to walk. And so part of that process when our children were learning how to walk was they were going to fall down. They were going to stumble and bump their head on something. They were going to do a lot of things and make mistakes over and over and over again until they finally figured out how to get on their feet and do it predictably and consistently each and every time. And that same concept is no different than photography. The whole trick of photography is, how do I become consistent? How do I get to the point where I know when I take a picture of something, the picture is going to be good to my standards, or not my standards, but whoever takes the picture is going to be good to their standards. And so the big challenge is just building consistency. And again, the way you do that is just practice. And the way you do it with contests is enter a lot of categories. It's going to force you to go out and take pictures. It's going to force you to get better at your core categories. But then you're also spreading out a chance that you may can enter a category that's not nearly as competitive. If I were going to enter a contest today, the category I might not enter is just if there's one on say wildlife photography. And the reason, if it's just that general, and the reason why is how many pictures of wildlife are there out there? And so I may enter it, but I'm also enter a lot of other categories too, just to try to hedge my bet, just to make sure I get a better chance at winning some other stuff. Just some more general wildlife pictures. And another thing I do is think about dramatic lighting when I can. And this is one of those things that you can't control, but when you go out and you're taking pictures and you start looking back at your pictures and think, which ones do I want to enter in contest? I always think about dramatic lighting because I think, again, as we're going through that hierarchy of did you follow the rules? Are the pictures sharp? Is it in exceptional lighting? Then you get towards the end of the contest when you're really when I'm really trying to decide, you've got 6 really exceptional pictures in front of you. You're trying to decide who gets to win. And then you start looking for differentiators. If 5 of the pictures are in kind of lighting like this prairie chicken on the left is, and then all of a sudden we've got one that's in really dramatic lighting, then I tend to go with the one that's a little bit different than the rest of them. And so as you're taking pictures and you're out, start thinking about dramatic lighting. Sometimes dramatic lighting may be like this, and it's we're all taught to have the sun at your back when you're taking pictures of in nature. But side lighting like this is dramatic as well because it helps shape the animal with some shadow, light and shadow. Or then this is Caddo Lake down here in Texas. Just sunrise on Caddo Lake. Hey, here's something for you. Here's a bonus tip. There's a lot of things as time and technology move forward. There's a lot of core lessons in photography that people don't learn anymore. And I tend to ask this to people all the time, and no one ever has an answer for it. When I was young and I would read and I was learning photography and I was reading magazines and books about things, I would see this thing mentioned all the time. But when you're shooting pictures of the sun or the moon, do y'all know what focal length you shoot it at to make it look natural in your pictures? Because we've all seen pictures of the supermoon. People are shooting with 800 millimeter lenses that makes the moon look humongous. But I tend to like the pictures of the sun or the moon to be more natural in my landscapes. Does anyone know the focal length you shoot? Well, let me back up. Does anyone know the focal length that we see at?
I always use 50 millimeter as
Yeah, that's right. 50 millimeters is how we see. And so if you look at binoculars, binoculars may be 10x. And what that means is that's 10 times 50 millimeters. So that's equivalent to a 500 millimeter lens. And so that just gives that 10x is the times magnification over your normal vision, which is 50 millimeters. But if you shot a picture of the sun or moon, like sunrise like this over Caddo Lake, if I was to shoot this picture with a 50 millimeter lens, the sun would look like a little speck in the image. And so here's your bonus tip of the day. 200 millimeters is how you shoot the sun or the moon to make it look a natural size in your picture. So this picture was shot at 200 millimeters. And so when I say dramatic lighting, that's kind of the thing I'm thinking about too. And it was a natural because we had mist coming up off this lake and we just had to find the right trees as the sun was coming up. And it was just, then once the sun came up, to me, this was the most dramatic scene because you can see that mist as it's being backlit by the sun early in the morning. Or this was a dramatic moment. It's one of those things you can't always predict it, but you just got to be on the lookout for it. But again, as you're back home curating your pictures, thinking which ones do I want to enter? For me, when I'm judging them, again, this is when you get to the very end, and I'm trying to pick, the best picture out of an exceptional dozen pictures. The ones that usually stand out to me in the end are the ones that have really dramatic lighting in it. And and I'll tell you what, when you can get a picture like this, these things are always gifts. I mean, they don't happen every day, and it's really got to be at the right place at the right time to see have the sun kind of lighting up the clouds like it is in the background, and then this elk be in the shadow of a mountain. And oh yeah, by the way, I was right in that place when he decided to bugle. So all those things have to happen right. But again, when you're kind of curating the pictures, think dramatic lighting in the end, and then think behavior. I alluded to this earlier that I like animals doing something. aside from sitting there. I mean, on that one contest I mentioned before, the where I had all those images I had to plow through. A lot of the pictures again, and because when you're judging a contest, you get to a point when there's some obviously bad pictures in the bunch. When I say bad, I don't mean to impugn anyone's efforts, but they're bad from a technical sense. They're not in focus. The lighting's not great. All those things, they get kicked out. Well, in the end, you're really to repeat myself over and over. You're looking at a group of pictures that they're all pretty good, and so but you've still got to make a decision which one's best. And so if they meet all the technical requirements I mentioned, and if they're in exceptional lighting, then I start thinking about behavior. Are they doing something? Is the animal doing something? And it may be like this. This is a white-tailed buck. This is a behavior called the Fleming response, and it's lip curl. And they do it during the rut because they can smell the air around these does and see if one doe is ready to breed or not. So that's what this buck was doing. So I always try to think about behavior. And so that's kind of a nebulous thought, but capture animals doing the things that animals do. You can take a technically excellent picture of a bird sitting on a branch, which is a great picture, and took a lot of them last week. I did on this workshop we were doing. But the bonus is birds in flight, or the mammal doing something, or animals fighting, or doing something that kind of defines that species, or turkeys gobbling. I love wild turkeys, and every time I can get a picture like this, to me it's a blessing. And I've gotten hundreds of pictures like this, but I never get tired of taking the same picture because I love to hear I love turkeys. I love to hear them gobble, and you can see by this picture there, it's in exceptional lighting because you can see how iridescent that turkey is. And this is on my own farm here. One of the reasons that this farm really attracted me and I bought it from my brother. When I bought it, is the fact that it's got a 2-acre wetland on it. And so every day in the spring and summer, I can go down there and watch birds feed like this. And this picture was on purpose. It was, I mean, I say it was on purpose. I didn't tell the egret to catch a fish or was catching a crawdad in front of me like that. But I went down there. Everything was planned because a white bird on a dark background I knew would stand out. And if you really pay attention to this picture, I don't think you can see my mouse, but the highlights of this bird are on top of it. So this bird was backlit. And I knew the only way to be able to see the water splash, if I was to be able to get a picture like this, is to have the water backlit against a dark background. And so knowing the birds were down there, my setup, try to control everything I could. The time of day I went, the setup, the lens I used, by the way, this was shot with a 500 millimeter lens, f4 Canon lens, which I shot it on about f5.6 just to try to get a little more depth of field. And so everything was planned to the point I just had to wait for the bird to show up in front of me and start catching stuff. And got lucky and it happened. But that whole thinking about exceptional lighting and just setting up where it's backlit, really to me made this whole picture kind of stand out, not only from a bird standpoint, but also if the sun would have been behind me, you couldn't see the water like you see there. These pictures remind me when I was a high school teacher in the springtime, when all the kids would get to feeling, because the weather was improving, all the kids were kind of feeling good, and we'd go out in the courtyard during the middle of the day at lunch. This always reminded me of high school boys and how they would do and puff out their chest and strut around for the girls. But if you notice, there's no girls paying attention to them there. But again, this goes back to exceptional lighting. Everything's super, super sharp. All those fundamental techniques you can do, the exceptional lighting, because this was taken maybe 30 minutes after the sun came up, because again, you can see all the iridescence in their feathers, and the birds are doing something. My only regret on this picture, if the birds were actually too close to me, because I cut their feet off, and that's my regret of this picture. But to me, it's such a cool shot otherwise. That's why I want to include it. And all these pictures you see are uncropped, except for just to fit in the bounds of the picture. And so, this picture may be even better if I cropped it tighter and just eliminated their feet. And then mind the details. This is when you're back curating your own pictures, trying to decide what you want to enter, especially if it's nature and wildlife photography. You'll hear, if you follow any of the forums or any discussions about bird photography, especially, bird photographers are the worst about it. they'll constantly talk about leg position and wing position and the way the head's turned and all that stuff. And it does make a difference. I mean, it really does. I don't get, when I'm out taking pictures, I don't get so caught up in that. But if I was entering a contest, I would make sure that, you know, that the wing position, like for example, like this one, to me, this is a better picture because the tops of bird's wings always look better than the underside of the bird wings. And even though you can see the underside of the wing here, you can also see the top of the wing. I just think that that's a better shot when the bird's wings are forward as opposed to being behind them. I think they look worse when they're behind them. I think birds' wings look best when they're either out to the side or out in front of them like this one. So this one again is sharp, exceptional lighting. The wing position's right, the head position's right because the bird's kind of coming in at a good angle. The bird's not going away from you. That's really the key part on all this. And this shot here, I had someone critique the shot one time. They're saying, "Oh, it's a good shot, except that one twig in the background behind the bobcat." And yeah, I guess I could go erase that, but I have a tendency not to do that stuff, not to go erase stuff like that. I try to just do it right because that stick doesn't bother me. But when I talk about leg position in this shot here, I was on the ground when I took this picture. I was camouflaged up in a ghillie suit. I knew the bobcat was in the area. I was hoping she would come by that morning, and she did. I got lucky. Overcast day, which doesn't really bother me because you can still get exceptional lighting because it makes everything look so soft. But to me, of all the pictures I took of this bobcat, this is my favorite because she's looking at me and just that one leg being stepping towards me kind of makes a kind of an unknown suggestion. The bobcat's just not standing there. She's that leg position and one leg being forward from the other just kind of makes it really, really dynamic in my opinion. And then really, I'm getting towards the end here, but I don't know if this is the last slide or not. I can't remember, but we're towards the last. But here's the one thing that I will say, and I got to warn you, I'm not an old man yet, but I can see it on the horizon. So I've got an old man rant about to come out, and that is social media has killed photographic composition. There was a time when we used to all know the rule of thirds and we'd shoot by the rule of thirds and well, social media and a little bit of technology. Well, now you get some of these contests that I'll enter, they make you turn in your original image, because that's how you really tell who got the good pictures in the original. And there's so many people now that they just put the subject right in the middle of the frame. They don't try to think about composition or rule of thirds or anything else. I get it. When we were all still shooting digital SLRs, it was a little harder to move around the focus point really quick, so it was easier to leave it in the middle and just center punch everything and then crop later to make it look good. But with the eye tracking now, and the fact that the eye tracking on most all these cameras, maybe all of them, as far as I know, I haven't seen every camera with eye tracking, but like on my Canon R5s that I use, the eye tracking goes edge to edge on the frame. So there's really no excuse that I won't think about composition whenever I'm shooting the picture. And again, it's one of those things that if I don't have to go back and crop it later, then it just saves me time in post processing. And I'll talk about time in a little bit. Let me get my phone going right quick. But again, one of the things I always try to think about when I take the picture is composition. And I know I can do it after the fact, but I want to get it right in camera for a couple of reasons. Again, I talked about it saves me time, but number two is, I spent, I don't know what is the Canon, does anybody shoot Canon R5s or even in like a Nikon Z7 or Z8 or anything like that? I mean, these cameras cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah, they're
And
quite a few
so,
thousand right now.
yeah, so if I spend thousands of dollars to have 45 megapixels, it kind of pains me to have to cut any of them out of there. So that's why I like trying to get it right in camera, but really for more of the practical reasons. And this goes back, I don't know if y'all have ever thought about this before, but from a business standpoint, these are the things I think about is, I don't know if you ever thought about this before, but well, I said it earlier, no one ever gets a digital camera and takes fewer pictures. We'll always take more and more pictures. And so on a typical year, and this isn't even a lot of pictures, I don't think now, because you can turn these cameras on silent electronic shutter and rattle off 30 or more frames a second before you know it. And
Yeah.
so if you shot 100,000 pictures a year and you figured out a way, and I think this is a really conservative number because I think it's more than this. If you figured out a way to save 4 seconds per image on not having to mess with it once you get home, that's 400,000 seconds. All right. If we divide that by 60 and divide it by 60 one more time, that's 111 hours that you save by shooting 100,000 pictures a year, just by trying to get the process right in camera, not automatically default into, well, I can fix it when I get back home. I mean, 111 hours on a typical work week, a 40-hour work week, that's 2 and 3/4 work. That's 2 and 3/4 work weeks of hours that you're saving just by trying to get it right as you can in the camera. And I think about all the things I would want to do with that 2 and 3/4 extra weeks a year. And a lot of it's not sitting behind a computer because I do enough of that. I want to go find something else to do. So that's why I say remember composition, because if you get it, and all these are, like I said, this one on the left of this quilt, I chopped it off a little bit on top just to make it fit with the format of this slideshow. But all these are just they were composed in camera. This is how they come out. And so that's what I encourage you to do, is just when you're thinking about contests, especially if it's a contest that requires you to show the original images, then think about composition in the camera. And there's also a point too, that if you crop, that image is going to start to degrade in the way it looks over time. That all these cameras are designed to work their best at full frame with whatever lens you're using. So so if you can do that, that's the way to go. Just get it right in camera. So a few last thoughts. So my takeaway from both sides of the aisle is use contests as a learning experience. And I think that's why I would get my son to enter them, because my mama used to tell me how good a photographer I was when she knew that I wasn't, back when I first started taking pictures. She just did it to humor me because that's what mamas do. And so I never really learned. What took me to learn photography was to be young enough and be naive enough to think I can start getting pictures in magazines and start sending my pictures off to magazines and getting rejected. And then learning from that rejection of what it would take to be better and better and better. And so I encourage everyone, even if you're pretty new at photography, use contests as a learning experience and a way to get feedback, because I don't know about in y'all's social circles. I could put a pretty mediocre picture on Facebook and everybody's going to say the same thing. Oh, it's a great shot, whether it is or not. Because there's another thing that goes on too. People will see a picture and they think that's a great picture until they see a really good picture next to it. Then you can all of a sudden realize that maybe picture A is not as good as I thought it was. Picture B is really the great picture. So I don't think social media is a good way to learn, because I think most people are going to be nice and tell you it's good, whether it is or not, because they're like our mothers. But I think contests are a good way because of the anonymity of the contest. It's just a good learning experience for people. Number two goes back to the practice part. Use contests as an excuse to get outside and take pictures. When I first started taking pictures, and I still do this today, whether I'm doing it to make money or not, I'll still give myself some kind of self-assignment to go out and do, just for the practice of taking pictures. Because anytime you can press the button and analyze the results and figure out what you did right or what you did wrong, it's a good exercise to do. There's many times when I'll get a new camera, I'll sit in my office and I'll take pictures of stuff on the desktop just to kind of figure out what it does and figure out what the limitations are. So any excuse you get to get outside and take pictures is a good excuse. Don't take defeat personally. That big contest I keep mentioning, they had a reception at the end of the year to announce all the winners, and they invited me and the other two judges to come, but they're like, we're inviting you as a formality, but you really don't want to come, because people get pretty emotional when they find out their pictures didn't win. And so I just encourage everybody, don't take defeat personally. When I did that from just a professional photography standpoint, from a magazine or a commercial photography, if someone else said no, I was always taught that God doesn't close one door without opening another. So I'd go find that other open door. So I learned to not take it personally. It wasn't a slam against me. It was just me saying that what I'm doing is not good enough. And I got to go either get better or find someone who I'm more compatible with on the way I do things. And then I would say too, ask for feedback from judges when appropriate and allowed. Uh, I am not a flamethrower by nature. You know, if I didn't pick people's pictures and they ask the reason why, I will give them what I feel like is a good, sound, reasoned response and not be rude about it. And because you know the thing is, you know, from a judge's standpoint and from a photographer's standpoint, we're all just out taking pictures. Nobody's curing world hunger by taking a picture of a badger. I mean, let's be honest about it. So I try not to have much ego about it. I mean, I've been blessed to be able to press a button on a little machine and make something that people find value in. And so I've never taken that for granted. And the fact that other people would come to me and ask for feedback, I'll give feedback in a sense that I just want you to be better and I want you to enjoy it more. And I want you to kind of have the joy out of photography that it's always brought me. And so I'll give feedback in that spirit and just try to help people get better. So if you can, if a contest will let you ask, you know, just ask the judge, what could I have done better to get to be able to place higher? And when you do that, you'll be surprised at how the dynamic changes and how many people are willing to help you get better. And if you ask the question, this is important. Frame your questions in a way that doesn't incite defensiveness. Don't ask the question about why didn't you pick my picture for first place? If you ask it in that way, the person judging is automatically going to be defensive. I always chose to think that, well, I must be the problem. So I would ask it in this way. What could I have done better for my picture to place higher? Then you get a better answer out of it instead of trying to put the judge on defensive. And then this is really kind of important, not only in photography, but in life. Don't ask a question that you don't want to hear an answer to. And I've always thought that important. If you know, if you ask the question, be ready to hear that, well, you're just not a very good photographer, you know, because some judges are gonna be that way. I don't like it. I don't think it serves any purpose for people to have arrogance and about what they're doing and when they're judging. I think, you know, we're all kind of created to help one another. And so I just think that if you ask a question, be prepared to hear the answer, whether it's an answer you want to hear or it's an answer you don't want to hear. So that's important as well. And the main thing is on all of it, just have fun. I mean, that's what this whole thing is about. You know, take pictures, enjoy your surroundings, enjoy your camera, enjoy the people you're with, and just have a whole lot of fun. And so that's what I encourage people to do all along. And so, by the way, that egret that was splashed in the water a while ago, that's what he caught right there was a crawdad. So he's about to eat it there. And then
Good. Yeah,
does anybody have any questions for me, by the way?
Yeah, we got a couple here.
Okay.
Chip Young was asking, when you say to shoot vertical, is that shooting in vertical camera orientation or do you crop vertical?
You know, it goes back to what I said about cropping. I try to get it right in the camera first. So I will shoot vertical orientation. And that's a pretty good question for this slide because all of these are in vertical and they were all shot that they were all shot that way. Because what I do is I'll look at the subject and I just say, does it look more? I mean, it's just pretty simple for me. Does it look like a vertical subject? Would it look better vertical? So for me, like a rabbit there, the rabbit's the star of the show. If I was to shoot that in horizontal, you'd have a lot of just extraneous pasture in the image that doesn't really serve the subject any purpose. So I'll shoot it in vertical because that's just, again, the shape of the animal is kind of in the vertical right there. Now, here's the part that changes. If all of a sudden the animal's if this rabbit's in profile to me, it becomes a horizontal shot more than a vertical shot. But with him facing to me, he's more upright looking, so I shoot a vertical like that. So yeah, I'm not going to say I've never cropped a horizontal to make it a vertical, but for the most part, and this goes back to the way I learned in my film days, I will shoot how I want the picture to be in the end and try to get it as right as I can in the camera and then go from there, like the armadillo there. In September, well, they're always here, but in September, our yard armadillos will come out and hang out with us all the time. And so we'll be walking out in our yard and we have 3 or 4 armadillos that you can't pet them, but they just don't fear us. And so that was actually shot in my front. That picture there was shot in my front yard. And I knew that, or I thought that armadillo might do that because armadillos, they're like, y'all remember the cartoon Mr. Magoo from back in the day?
Mm-hmm.
The guy I couldn't see. Well,
yeah,
they're like Mr. Magoo. They can't see very well, so they kind of just poke around in the yard, but they can smell really good. And so my thought was, I'm going to try to get downwind of this armadillo so he can't see, and I'm going to lay on the ground because he was kind of feeding towards me. Because if they're trying to figure something out, I've seen this behavior before. They'll stand up on their back legs and they'll sniff the air. And sure
Uh,
enough, when he got close enough to me, he could see me. He couldn't really tell what I was, so he raised up on two legs and was sniffing the air right there. My only regret, I was too low. I wish I could. I wish I'd have shot the whole body there.
sure.
So,
Um, we got Brian Latimus was asking, you mentioned using a camouflage suit. Can you tell us more about the suit? And he also said, great presentation.
oh,
Thanks.
thank you. Uh, yeah, I can. So it all depends on the animal, and this goes back to kind of field craft and just learning it over time. If it's an animal, if it's a predator, if it's a truly wild predator, like a coyote or a bobcat, a lot of times I'll wear a ghillie suit. If you don't know what a ghillie suit is, it's what if you go watch American Sniper or some military movie with snipers in it, and that's what those snipers wear to completely disappear. And what they look like when you're wearing one, you look like Bigfoot because they just looks like just shaggy hair hanging off of you, but it's in browns and greens and all kinds of different colors. And you can flat disappear wearing one of those things. Now they're cumbersome and big and heavy, and I don't use one all the time, only under certain circumstances. But in it depends on the animal. The like rabbits, you don't really need to wear camouflage or or uh armadillos. They can't see good enough to see it anyway. But in general, if I don't wear camouflage, I'll wear like a shirt like I've got now that's just kind of a drab color. Thing you don't want to wear is bright colors. It's going to stand out in the environment because most of the time, if you can see an animal, they can probably see you. And so really what you're just trying to do is just not stand out to them and where you're going to alarm them. And you can watch their body language, know when they're alarmed. But usually, when I go out to take wildlife pictures, I'll just, you can go to Walmart or go to Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's and just buy any camouflage clothes right off the shelf. If I am getting kind of technical about it, I do suggest kind of matching. I've got several patterns of camouflage that matches the time of year and terrain I may be shooting at. So in the springtime, if I'm wearing camo, it may be more of a green pattern. And if I go shoot in the fall, it may be more of kind of uh, a, a, a fall pattern with autumn colors in it. And then if I'm shooting around wetlands, they have wetland patterns. If I'm shooting out in the sage, they have sage
Hmm.
patterns. We live in the good old days of camouflage now too. If you go to a site like called realtree.com, and Realtree is a great company. I haven't done work for them in a while, but I used to do a lot of work for their company, photographing their camo patterns. And so I'm an advocate of the way they do business and their camo patterns. But realtree.com, you can see all the various camo patterns and what you should select. And then I'll say one last thing for birds, like all the turkeys in this presentation, as well as the egret there. I just use a blind because birds are oblivious to blinds, even backyard birds. If you go in these blinds I buy, I they're not expensive. They're like $60, but they're a little pop-up blind. They look like a little bitty tiny pop-up tent, but they're a pop-up blind that you can just get a lawn chair and sit inside of them. And you can wear a shirt and shorts and a t-shirt, but as long as your pattern is broken up, for birds, you just disappear to them. Well, let me back up. Like these, like these turkeys, for example. I mean, I was sitting in the blind when I shot these pictures. One time I was shooting pictures of turkeys, and turkeys are pretty intelligent birds and they can see exceptionally well. Biologists will say if they could smell, that they'd be almost impossible to get close to. But I was taking pictures of turkeys one time. And it was a friend of mine had this ranch, and he would tell me that every morning these turkeys would go out into this dried up pond he had, and they would strut around in the bottom of the pond. And so I went out there one morning to see it, and sure enough, they showed up. Well, I'm sitting in this pop up blind in a t-shirt and shorts and flip flops because it was kind of warm that day. And then a puff of wind came and blew the blind off of me. And so all of a sudden, I'm sitting out there in the middle of this pond in this lawn chair with my camera in front of me, and 50 turkeys all of a sudden stopped what they were doing and looked straight at me. And these turkeys are 30 yards away. And so the only thing I knew to do then was I turned around behind me and grabbed the blind and put it back over the top of me. And when I did, it's like I disappeared. Every one of those turkeys went back to doing what they were doing instantly. And so those blinds are a real effective way to shoot pictures of birds. You know, again, it may be in a feeder in your backyard and your neighbors may question, why are you sitting in a camo blind in your backyard? But that's how you get close to birds, is they're just oblivious to you when you do that. So let me get caught back up where we were. We have any other questions?
Well, we have Jerry asking what was the camo store's name? Was I know you were talking to Real Tree.
Yeah.
Do
So
they
real,
sell the camo
well,
outfits?
no. So Realtree, they're the ones that develop the camo patterns.
Yeah.
And so, but you can go there and see all the patterns they have and how, you know, in the different terrains they fit in. But then you could go to, you know, basspro.com or cabela's.com or one of the big, or what do
Right.
y'all have Sportsman's Warehouse or y'all have Shields up there, right?
Well, we have Cabela's and Bass Pro.
Okay. Well, yeah, all of those sell these patterns.
Yeah.
The
Any of
two,
the hunting places are
yeah,
going
any
to
of the
have
hunting
it.
places. The two big companies that sell camo, the two big brands of camo patterns, the ones that I think do the best job in really understanding the science of concealment is Realtree and then another one called Mossy Oak. Those are the two big camo pattern developers. But you can also
Right.
go to those retailers too. And if you want to buy a ghillie suit, you can find ghillie suits there too. Or any kind of
Yeah.
any the, like I said, we live in the good old days of camouflage. There's all kinds of things that you can all kinds of patterns you can buy and you can really disappear from animals.
Yep.
The thing that you takes a little more technicalities, and maybe this is another presentation for another day, is uh most birds can't smell, but mammals can smell, and that's another layer of consideration you get into. The more the better the sense of smell of an animal like a bobcat, the harder it is to get photographs of them. That's why every time I've taken a picture of a bobcat, it's just I feel so lucky to be able to do that because it's such a hard animal to get a picture of, get a good photograph of. I see them a lot, but when I see them, they're 100 yards crossing a county road in front of me. But to be able to get
Yeah.
close to one and see them, that's because they smell so good. I'll tell you this quick story. I did a story for a magazine a couple of years ago called The Secret Life of Bobcats. And my thesis was that bobcats live all around us and we just never see them. Like right now on my farm, I know I've probably got 2 or 3 bobcats living here just because I see their tracks. I just never see them. And so in Texas, it's illegal to pick up road killed game animals like deer. And so working with our local uh, game warden, I got permission every time there was a road killed deer near my house. I lived out in the country where I used to live. Uh, I could go pick them up on my tractor and bring them on my property. And so you know, after I got permission, a couple weeks passed and the deer got killed on the highway. So I took my tractor down there, picked it up, brought it back, and I set it like 75 yards away from my house out in the pasture. And I put, y'all have seen these game cameras people like hunters use to track. Well,
Yeah.
I had one made, put together. Had a guy in Nebraska make me a passive infrared sensor. And you can buy all this stuff now commercially, but at the time I cobbled this thing together, made me a waterproof housing for my digital SLR out of an ammo can and cut a window in the side of it and did all this stuff and had a passive infrared sensor. And I put this camera up with a couple of lights on this dead deer carcass. And then a couple days passed. No, the next day passed and I got home and I walked down to check to see if anything had found it. And sure enough, something had been eaten on it. And when I checked the camera, there was a bobcat eating off that deer carcass when I was walking up. I mean, by the timestamp, it heard me pull up, get out of my truck, and saw me walking down there and just slipped away from me. And I never saw it. And it's
Wow.
amazing. Those things are so stealthy because they can see good and they can smell good and they're really, really, really smart. So when you're dealing with animals like that, you can almost not have enough camouflage.
Sure. Sure.
Oh, there we go. That's another bobcat.
Yeah.
That's a big male. He's beautiful.
Yeah. I know we've got one around by us, but we know you're right. We never see them.
When I was doing that story, the biggest, and it amazed me because I was doing all the research and talking to biologists and scientists and stuff who study this stuff and are a lot smarter than I am about it. Uh, and this is Texas specific, but I can't imagine it wouldn't be more general across the country. this amazed me, but the densest population of bobcats per acre in Texas, in all the whole state of Texas, is in the Dallas Fort Worth metroplex. They're all city
Huh.
bobcats and suburban bobcats, but it's the highest
Wow.
density per acre of bobcats anywhere, and it just amazed me to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I got a couple more. Oh, I always put this at the end. I call this the world's greatest dolphin photo. I say it is a nice picture. That was taken with the
Yep.
24 millimeter lens. This is
Wow.
this is all the photographic experience came to muster in about 2 seconds. This is where practice comes into play, because getting set up for this picture, it was an exercise in muscle memory. And when that dolphin jumped, because I was right in the back of the boat and heard a splash behind me and looked and saw a dolphin fin. And so I switched to put a 24 millimeter lens on and then set up the camera really fast and then turned around. And then that was really about the third picture I took of that dolphin as he leapt.
Hmm.
And so it all came together on that one. So with
Yeah.
that, I'll share a couple more things with you. If if you like what I say, I've got a newsletter that comes out every month with full of photo tips and stuff. You can check it out at hackberryfarmtexas.com. And if you ever decide you want to travel somewhere in the world with me, you'll find out more information about the workshops I do there. And we have a lot. All I can say is we have a lot of fun on our workshops, and we got a good crew of people that travel with us on multiple occasions. So that's another thing that's a blessing to get to do, is go share time in the field with like-minded people and go look at all of creation like that. And it's just a fun thing to do. So if you want to sign up on my newsletter, it's hackberryfarmtexas.com. And one of the things I promised everybody, if you as you think about this presentation today, if you come up with more questions, send me an email, russell@russellgraves.com. Sometimes I may be a day or two late getting back to you, depending on how busy I get, but I always respond to emails. So feel free to stay in touch if you want to. And with that said, I think that's my last slide right there, Jeff. That's all I have, unless you have some more
Yeah.
questions for me.
Great. Thank you. Yes. We don't other than saying a very inspirational presentation, and thank you. And I'll agree with that. It was very interesting. Had a lot of good tips to remind people what they should be doing to get good pictures, period. And yes, check out his website, subscribe to his newsletter. I've been getting it lately, and he's got a lot of interesting stuff in there. So glad I found you. I can't remember exactly how, but it's I come up with people all the time, and it's fun to find new photographers or new ones for us at least, and great to be able to bring them in to this group. So
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. I appreciate
thank you.
everybody listening in, and thanks for the good questions, and thanks for listening to my Texas twang for all this time.
That's
One
all
little
right.
comment I have, Russell, you had said in your presentation that to research the judges, and I just wanted to comment that when I used to actively compete 5 years ago, I always took notes that I still use today for the judges on what type of photography they specialize in, and the things that they like and don't like about pictures. And for the camera clubs today, when I submit and I know those judges, I look back at all my old files, and it determines what pictures I'm going to submit for their competition.
It makes a difference. I mean, because again, I mean, you try to be unbiased, but you take pictures that you like and you have your own eye, and that's it's just human nature. That's just what you gravitate to.
Yeah.
I'm just glad 34 years ago when my wife started dating that she liked ugly men. So that's what I'm proud of.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes a difference. And it's so when you can research the judges, because you'll be surprised at how much insight you can gain just by understanding who's judging what you're doing.
Yeah. And listening to them when they critique, I found that, what they say gives a lot of information about how they're going to judge pictures. And, some like the story, some like the street photography, some like wildlife. And when they're judging wildlife, they look for this or that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And really, and really, I think it goes without saying that the relationship you enter into whenever you put your pictures into a contest to be judged is you're asking for somebody for their opinion about your picture. I mean, that's what you're doing. And you may not like their opinion. But again, that's why I say go back to don't take it personally. You may not like their opinion, but listen to why they say what they say, and you may can gain some insight from it.
Yeah, very true. Very true. I always tell people it's the opinion of the judges and nobody else. So if you don't do well in one competition, you might do better in another one. So
Yep.
yeah, it's finding out what those judges like. So
Yeah, and I always said take what they say with a grain of salt, but if you hear it over and over again, then maybe you should listen.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that's true.
it's true, and that's all part of the process. I think is learning as a photographer is that, you know, you learn some discernment and you learn what should be taken with a grain of salt and what you know what you should listen to. I think from a photography standpoint, maybe one of the greatest things that ever happened is also one of the worst things that ever happened, and that's YouTube, because you can find out so much information on YouTube, but you can also find out so much information on YouTube, and it becomes
Yeah.
overwhelming. You know, like that story I told earlier about these two women on the workshop I had last. When I say last week, not this past week, but the week before that was, you know, well, I was always taught this, and someone else says I was always taught that, and that's where that discernment comes in. Is you reach a point, I think, when you kind of have it in your mind that what works best for you, and you just do that over and over again. Photography, I don't know if you ever thought about it this way, but photography is like, and I explain this a lot. It's like Google Maps. It's if you were to put in where you live, if you were to go to Google Maps right now and tell Google Maps to give you directions from where you live now to Dodge City, Texas, where I'm at, it's going to give you 3 different choices. But what do all 3 choices do? They get you to the same spot.
Yeah.
And that's how photography is. I think when you have people that are so, I'll tell you this about me. I can prove this mathematically. 85% of the pictures I've ever taken, digital pictures I've ever taken, I shot them on aperture priority. And I'll have people say, I'll have people in my workshops tell me, well, I had another workshop instructor tell me you're not a serious photographer unless you shoot on manual. And I'm like, I'm pretty serious about it. And I've shot all these pictures on aperture priority, because whether you shoot manual, and that's where I think some of these debates we get into with photography about what's best, manual or shutter priority or aperture. It's important you understand how they all work, but the mode you use to get there is at the end immaterial. I use aperture priority because it's one less button knob I've got to turn wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I can set the ISO and I can set the aperture, and I'll let the camera decide the shutter speed, and I can adjust it using exposure compensation, but it's just a lot less work I have to do on the back end. That's why I like using that. But you know, someone that shoots all manual can take just as good of pictures. It's those 3 different routes to the same point that everyone's seeking to get. And so what I always encourage people to do is find the route that works best for you. Again, that's all part of building that discernment. When you take stuff with a grain of salt, that you hear other people say, find that path that works for you and make it repeatable each and every time, because that's, to me, that's the essence of photography. Is we can all take a good picture every now and then, but I think the thing people want to get to the point of doing is just the consistency of knowing that every time they go out and every time they press the button, or about, you know, within reason, almost every time you press the button, you're going to get a good picture out of it. And just understanding that and how to get there is, to me, the essence of photography and how you learn. The route you take or the car you drive, that's where YouTube tends to start confusing people.
Yeah. 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 It's, yeah, it gets crazy with all the different opinions. So I got to be careful what you listen to on YouTube these days.
Yep. That's why I say it's the greatest thing and the worst thing all at the same time.
Right. I agree. It's just way too much of the stuff on there, and you got to pick and choose.
Yep.
But it's always hard to know what to pick and which ones to choose.
Well, that's why I say pick someone you trust and then just run it past
Yep.
them and listen to what they say.
Yep. Usually if I hear it from 3 different people, the same thing, then I got the feeling that might be the right way. But
Yeah.
even then, I'm still get skeptical once in a while. But,
Well, I mean, there's some binaries in photography. There's the right way and the wrong way on some things, but so much of it is
Yep.
just kind of your way. You know what I mean?
yep,
And it's just you got to find your way, and that the only way you do that is just by going out and taking pictures and practicing and learning from your mistakes. The
Yeah.
beautiful thing about digital photography, I tell people all the time, is unlike film back in the day when I would mess up, I never really knew why. But with digital, if you look at the metadata, you got a recipe for both your success and your failures.
yeah.
You
It's
can,
really nice to be able to have all that info,
yeah.
and besides not having the cost of shooting film and processing it and only getting 36 shots at a time. So,
It's literally like playing slot machines, but you're using the casino's money. I mean, it just
Yep.
that's why I
Yep.
tell people rip away. Doesn't
Yep.
again, I'm not picking on it, but again, this last workshop, I had one lady who says, well, I had, my camera set the way I am because a workshop instructor took it away from me and set my camera up because they said I was overshooting. And I said, I mean, everybody comes to the game to shoot pictures. I don't know if there's a such thing as overshooting. I mean, because again, there's value in taking bad pictures. Just like I mentioned when your children were learning to walk, there's value in them falling down because it helps you figure out how to get up and stay up over time. And so I just think you go out and take pictures and learn from your mistakes and keep taking them and keep taking them. So that's the way you get better.
Yeah. I tell that they need to figure out how to edit their photos, though. That's almost a whole hour discussion, is editing to make sure that they don't end up with all sorts of bad stuff floating around. But,
It is, yeah, and that's a whole other discipline in itself almost.
yeah, I got a couple guys that I work with that haven't learned to edit, and they keep running out of hard drives, and I go, well, you got the choice: buy more hard drives or learn to edit.
Well, it sounds like
Got one that keeps buying hard drives.
They just need to go through and just delete some pictures.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
that's the easiest discernment you can do, is just what's a good picture or a bad picture. If it's
Yep. Yeah.
out of focus and poorly exposed, it's probably best to delete it, because this may be the best photo advice I can give when it comes to post-processing. Never fall in love with something that won't love you back, and a bad picture will never love you back. So it's best just to send them on back to pixel heaven and get reincarnated as a good picture one day.
Yep. I agree. Well, thank you, Russell. It was great having you talk about this, and
Yes, sir.
great to having you on. Like I said, you can stick around. We're going to open it up to just general Q&A, and if anybody has some questions, we'll be glad to answer them. And if we don't get any questions, we're going to quit early so we can go out. And up here in Wisconsin, we're getting 75 degrees and sunny weather, and it's finally, well, we had storms last night, so things are drying out.
It's a miracle. There was one person with that kind of weather. There's one person on today, so I appreciate you stopping and listening. Yeah, I'll hang around.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn my video off though and just listen in. So
okay, no problem.
Right. Thank y'all.
Great. Well, thank you, Russell.
Take care.
Thanks a lot. Okay, anybody have any questions, problems?
You can stop spotlight, Jeff, and that'll put us all.
Oh yeah, you're right. I have my cursor sitting on it, and
Jeff, I noticed the participants list, they have a new option where we can allow the participants to talk if you hover over. So that's kind of cool.
Great.
So
yeah.
Raise your hand if they want to talk, or if they want to put it in the chat or Q&A, whatever. But
yeah. So anybody have any questions, any problems? Or are we at that point where we've answered them all and we don't have any? While we're waiting to see if anybody has anything, anybody that's in a camera club that's a 501c3, I did find out working all this week for a charity that I'm working with, Google Workspace has a nonprofit section, and for any nonprofit, if you qualify, which I would say camera clubs would qualify, you can get free Google Workspace, which includes a whole ton of stuff besides as many emails with your club's domain name as the back end of it, plus all the Google apps, Google Meet, all sorts of stuff, all for free. So if you're belong to a group that's a 501c3, a true charity type club, take a look at that, because it really can save you a bunch of money, because otherwise it's $72 a person to get Google Workspace. And this way you can get your whole club executive committee their own emails and everything that would just be correspond to your club and your domain name. So something worth looking into if you're looking for stuff like that. So
Jeff, we use that for the EAA Chapter 1158 in West Bend, Wisconsin, and that works out really good. We, instead of the Zoom meetings, we do the Google Meets, whatever, for the videos.
yeah,
So that works out really, really good.
yeah. I haven't tried Google Meet. I don't know how well it works. I doubt it's. I don't think it's as good as Zoom is, but if you don't have Zoom, then yeah, why not have Google Meet? So
Yeah, if you're just there to just talk, it's just easier for that. But if you want to participate and do polls or whatever, yeah, the Zoom is better for sure.
yeah. So I got Kenny Bowman is asking, we usually get the Wacko judge's name on the day of the competition. Is there a possibility to get the judge's name at a reasonable time before the competition to get a glimpse of what kind of photography they are into? I doubt if we'll ever put the names out ahead of time. About the only one you'll usually know is the best of show winner will be one of the judges. To be honest, a lot of times we're working to get judges about a week before we're judging the competition. So I don't think that will ever happen. It's something we could talk about in the competition committee, but right now we have such a hard time getting judges to judge that we probably wouldn't know it ahead of time. So, but yeah, we'll bring it up to the competition committee next time we have anything. Any other questions?
I'll just mention, Jeff, if you're a PSA chapter member and you were up in Door County last week, and you have some images you'd like to share and have put on the chapter website, you can certainly send those to me. Easiest way is probably using WeTransfer to send them to me, but so far Jerry Emmerich and I are the only ones that have images in the gallery, so it would be nice to see some of the other members, Rima or Brian. I guess you guys are the only ones on here, I think, that were there, but send images.
Yeah. Well, I know Ken and Brian were there, and Brian's working on it. We got Mark Blackma. Any suggestions for a fixed focal length between 35 to 100 that has macro? Well, it depends on your camera. Which camera do you have? Tamron makes, I believe it's a 90 millimeter macro. I would go with the longer, closer to the 100 millimeter range, just because that gets you a little better working distance. If you go to a wider angle, like a 55 millimeter macro, generally you're working really close to your subject, and that can be pretty good. So Yeah, Canon has a 100 millimeter 2.8. I know Nikon has a 105 2.8. That's really good. So, so it's all depends on what you want to shoot. I know there's a couple lenses that are even stronger than the 100 millimeter, and when you get to the stronger, higher focal lengths, you'll be able to get a better working distance from your subject, which is easier to photograph butterflies and other things, because otherwise you're too close and you got to wait for them to be on a colder morning to be able to photograph some of that stuff.
I think
So
one
I
time I
hope
seen
that
a
helps.
180. Yeah, it's like, oh, 180, that's
Yeah,
a good distance.
yeah, there was Nikon made a 180, I believe, for a while. I don't know if I don't think they still have it anymore. Thing is, a lot of the telephotos even will get you, you know, pretty good for close up. I use my 80 to 200 for what I guess you'd consider macro. It's really macro is a magnification of 1:1 or stronger. So you know, there's only a few lenses that do that, but generally it's thought of more as close-up lenses, and a good 80 to 200 telephoto works just fine for a lot of that stuff. And then you can throw extension tubes onto that to get even a closer magnification. So, anybody else in our group here have suggestions? So,
Pretty
other than
quiet
that,
group.
yeah, it's a quiet group today. I don't know. And I don't want to get into talking about Lightroom and Photoshop because that's next month. And I hope everybody downloads the latest version of Lightroom for those of you on Lightroom. I will say they just added the remove tool to Lightroom as an early access. And from what I've seen so far, and I'll be showing it next month, it really works pretty darn well. It works almost better than what's in Photoshop because they've added a few extra things to it in Lightroom.
Is
So
that in beta or is that in the release version?
it's in the release version. It's in early access, like they did the lens blur was an early access, but it worked pretty well. Lens blur now has gone into a full function and isn't early access anymore. It's just a regular part of Lightroom. And the remove tool has been turned into an early access, so it's still being perfected. But I just played with it for about 5 minutes last night, and it really is working pretty well. And they've even improved the lens blur tool on this new version of Lightroom so that it will works better for blurring the background and has a few more features, especially once you set it up, you can set up a preset with it and you can use that same blur setting on multiple pictures all at once.
What I
So-
understand was that with that lens blur, what's really nice is what I understand is you can adjust the depth of blur too in
Yep.
different locations.
So we'll go into that more in June, since I've working to put together a whole little talk on the lens blur, the new remove tool that's in Lightroom, plus a few other things that keep popping up in Photoshop as well. So we'll have all sorts of stuff like that next month.
Yeah, I hope they
So-
firmed up the processing on that lens blur. I tried using it a couple of times and it's very processing heavy and I mean, I have a pretty beefy computer, but it couldn't handle the lens blur on the pictures without crashing Lightroom or whatever.
Oh, wow.
So now that it's actually released officially, I'm hoping they've cleaned some of that up.
Yeah. It goes to the web, so it accesses the servers of Adobe, so it does take a little more time, just like the one in Photoshop. But yeah, it seems like it works pretty well. So we're seeing a lot of changes with AI coming that it's going to blur the lines even more now. Now our competition committee is going to have to look at that and decide if that's going to be allowed completely or not. And it's
Yeah, the
fortunately
remote,
using,
sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
you know, it's using parts of your own picture, so I think it's going to be allowed. But we're getting closer and closer to stuff that it used to be. I could say, well, yeah, as long as you can do it in Lightroom, it's going to be allowed in the Wacko competition. Soon it's going to be, well, I'm not sure what's all going to be allowed with the way they keep improving Lightroom. Soon Lightroom and Photoshop, I think, are going to be one program. I expect that to happen one of these days, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I've never been real fond of the spot healing tool or the clone tool in Lightroom. I've always gone into Photoshop. So I
yeah,
love the remove tool they put in Photoshop. So if they've moved that over to Lightroom, if it works as well as it did in Photoshop, it will be not having to go into Photoshop to do that.
yeah. It's going to save a lot. The only thing I'm not thrilled about is that it doesn't put it on a separate layer, because I always use the remove tool as a separate layer. So I had the original. Here it's just giving it the instructions yet, but it's still not. It'd be hard to go backwards to erase it using history instead. But yeah, you don't have to go into Photoshop, so that would be really nice.
Yeah, it would be nice to isolate it like that. I always do that too in Photoshop. I put my remove changes on a different layer.
Yeah, yeah. So gets a little tricky, but no, we got a lot of new changes. It does require that when you install the new version of Lightroom, it is going to make you a new catalog as well. So it's they updated it to a point. What I'm hoping they fix, because they want you to do the new a new catalog, is the syncing is supposed to be better for your images that you sync to their Adobe Cloud. And that's always been problematic. I'm hoping they fix all that with this new version, because it's always been a problem that stuff doesn't sync as well as it should. So we'll see. Anybody have any other questions, thoughts? Otherwise, we'll just call it a day early, a little bit early, because I'd like to get out and cut grass. It's about 6 inches tall at my place now. It's going to
Might
take
still
a
be
while.
pretty wet from yesterday with the three or four rounds of rain and that.
Yeah, well, it dries out pretty quick out by me, and we've got a nice breeze out there this morning, so I think won't be too bad. But yeah, I also had planted grass seed yesterday before the storms, and I think all that just washed away. So I'm gonna have to do that all over again. But that's
Well,
life.
it is pretty nice out there and that. Pretty comfortable.
Yeah, it's only 64. It hasn't warmed up as much as I would have thought, but yeah.
Good working weather.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
One thing right before we go is about a month ago, I had to go to Madison to pick up a speed light for my flash for my camera, and then I also got a 200-watt other light. So I want to start getting better on understanding using the trigger and that to make some really cool pictures with, cars and airplanes and that, to get some really cool, neat pictures with the flash. So I got to learn that.
Okay. Yeah, that should be fun to play with. Going to take a lot of learning. Flash is always a little more difficult, never something easy to do.
Well, then especially it gets complicated when you start using the trigger and then controlling each individual light separate too.
Yeah. Yep. But it's doable. But yeah, it does take a lot of learning and a lot of practice to understand how it works and what it can all do. So good luck with it, and we'll see if we can help you along the way.
Cool, thank you.
I also, Old Falls Village Park in Menominee Falls on 14th and 15th, 16th. of June is going to have World War II days. So if you like to shoot reenactments, Old Falls Village is an 18-acre park. Yeah, it's 15th and 16th of June. They're going to have all sorts of reenactments going on for World War II. So you're looking to get some interesting pictures. It's a good day, good weekend to come out. It's $10 to get in, so it doesn't cost a whole lot, and pretty easy to walk around and photograph all sorts of people dressed up in World War II outfits and doing reenactments. So something to take a look at. You can also find it at oldfallsvillagepark.com, just the website that I'm working on for them right now. So there's nothing else. I guess we'll just call it a day and let everybody get out into the nice weather and snap away. I got a bunch of phlox that are up out by me, so I think I'm going to try to get a few shots of that before or after I get my grass cut. So
Thanks,
I
Jeff.
think with
Have a
that,
good one,
we'll
then.
just call it. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.